Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a pretty hot topic, no pun intended.
Yeah.
We're diving into the language of climate change.
It's a big one. And I think it's particularly interesting because we talk a lot about the science of climate change.
Right.
But the language we use to discuss it can be just as revealing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we're here to do today, to really unpack how this language is being used to shape the debate and how it reflects different perspectives and biases. And for this deep dive, we've got a really fascinating mix of source material, opinion pieces, scientific articles.
Yeah, we got a nice little variety.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see, the different approaches that people take to the same issue. For example, we even have a piece from a climate change skeptic who makes this analogy about storks and babies.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. Definitely a head scratcher at first.
Yeah, you'll have to wait to hear that one.
Yeah, we'll unpack that one a little bit later.
Yeah. So let's start with the basics. We've got these two main genres that we're looking at: opinion pieces and scientific articles.
Right.
And right off the bat, you can see how they use language so differently to achieve their goals. What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well, opinion pieces, they're often much more colorful and dramatic.
Yeah.
They use bold claims, attention-grabbing metaphors, strong emotional appeals. It's like they're trying to really grab you by the shoulders and shake you and say, like, wake up, this is important.
Right. It's like a persuasive speech almost.
Exactly. They want to win you over to their side, even if it means, oversimplifying things a little bit or even bending the facts sometimes.
Yeah. And I notice even just looking at the titles, they're often very provocative. Like, we've got one here called "Stopping Climate Change is Hopeless. Let's do it."
Yeah, there you go. That's a perfect example. It's like a paradox.
Right.
Playing on our hope and our fear. At the same time, it's designed to really get you to think and want to read more.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's opinion pieces. Now contrast that with scientific articles.
Yeah, those are a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
It's all about neutrality. Sticking to the data, using very precise language to avoid any ambiguity.
It's a lot more, like you said, neutral, just the facts.
Exactly. Scientists aim to present their findings objectively. They rely heavily on data specialized vocabulary to build their arguments. Like in Jukka Wilander's thesis.
Oh, yeah.
He uses terms like anthropogenic,
right,
meaning caused by human activity,
and
degrowth,
correct,
to talk about, potential solutions.
So very specific language, very targeted.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got these two distinct genres, each with their own kind of language and goals.
Right.
But how does this actually play out in the arguments themselves?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
So now that we've seen how these different genres kind of approach the topic, let's actually examine the core arguments of what we call the consensus view.
Okay, so that's like the mainstream scientific understanding of climate change.
Exactly, the prevailing view, if you will.
Okay, perfect. So what struck you as particularly compelling in the articles that support this consensus view?
Well, I think one thing that really stands out is the emphasis on the urgency of the situation, the need for drastic action. The National Geographic article we have, it cites a pretty alarming statistic from that IPCC report.
Oh, right. The big one.
Yeah, the big one. And it says that we could hit a critical warming threshold in just 11 years.
11 years. That's not that far off.
Yeah, it's really not a lot of time. And to kind of bring it home, make it more relatable, climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe.
Yeah.
She's quoted in the article, and she compares that IPCC report to a doctor giving you like a troubling diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
Like a wake-up call, time to take action before things get even worse.
Absolutely. Okay, so the consensus view painting a pretty stark picture.
Yeah, for sure.
But we also have sources from the other side of the fence, right?
We do.
Folks who are maybe a little bit skeptical of this whole climate change thing.
Yeah, the climate skeptics.
Exactly. So I think it's important to understand their language and their tactics as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if we want to have any kind of productive conversation about this issue, we need to be able to engage with all sides of the argument.
Yeah, hear everyone out, understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. So let's dive into the world of climate change skepticism and see how they're using language to challenge that consensus view.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're stepping into the arena of climate change skepticism. What are some of the key strategies they use to challenge the prevailing scientific narrative?
Well, one thing that jumps out at me is their use of irony and humor. Sometimes even a bit dark.
Yeah.
As a way to kind of downplay the seriousness of the issue. It's like they're trying to make it more palatable, more relatable.
Right.
While subtly undermining that sense of urgency.
It's interesting because humor can be such a powerful tool for connection. But in this context, it almost feels like a way to deflect responsibility.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a tactic we see a lot in discussions of like complex and potentially uncomfortable topics.
Right.
By injecting humor, they can create this sense of camaraderie with the audience. Like, we're all in on the joke together.
Right.
And, kind of dismissing the concerns of those who are taking it seriously.
Yeah. It creates this kind of us versus them dynamic.
Exactly.
Where those who are alarmed by climate change are portrayed as, overly anxious or even gullible.
Mm-hmm. And this ties into another key strategy, which is questioning the validity of scientific models and data.
Okay.
They'll often highlight uncertainties or discrepancies in the research.
Right.
Suggesting that the science isn't settled, that there's still room for doubt.
So instead of directly refuting the science, they're kind of planting these seeds of uncertainty.
Yeah, exactly. Making it seem like the whole issue is still up for debate.
Which can be really effective, especially for those who aren't, deeply familiar with the scientific literature.
Right. Creates this sense of confusion and ambiguity.
Right.
And people might conclude, well, maybe the experts don't have all the answers after all.
Okay, so we've got humor, we've got this sowing seeds of doubt about the science. What about that stork and babies analogy you mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It's a prime example of what we call a red herring fallacy.
Okay.
It's basically a way of distracting from the main argument by introducing an irrelevant or misleading point.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for me. How does this stork analogy work?
So the author of this particular article uses it to argue against assuming causation from correlation.
Okay.
They're basically saying, just because we see rising carbon dioxide levels at the same time as rising temperatures doesn't necessarily mean that one is causing the other.
Right.
And they point to this, kind of funny example where in some European countries, there was a correlation between the number of storks nesting in an area and the number of babies born.
Okay.
Of course, nobody actually believes that storks bring babies. But it highlights that, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Okay, I see the analogy now, but how is it a distraction?
Well, it's a distraction because it shifts the focus away from the overwhelming body of scientific evidence that links human activity to climate change.
Okay.
The vast majority of climate scientists agree that the increase in greenhouse gases, primarily from burning fossil fuels, is the primary driver of rising global temperatures.
Right.
This analogy, while superficially clever, kind of sidesteps that mountain of evidence.
So it's a clever rhetorical trick, but it doesn't really hold up under scrutiny.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to be aware of these kinds of tactics because they can easily mislead people who aren't equipped to really analyze the underlying logic.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about some of the broader strategies used by climate change skeptics. Now let's get even more granular.
Okay.
Jukka Wilander's thesis identifies 4 distinct sub-discourses within these climate change conversations.
Right.
Can you walk us through those?
Sure. So the first one is what he calls the denial discourse. This is where individuals or groups just outright reject the evidence for human-caused climate change.
Right.
Often claiming it's a hoax or a conspiracy.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. What about the other 3?
The second one is the nature conservation discourse.
Okay.
This perspective acknowledges the reality of climate change, but frames it primarily as an environmental issue.
Okay.
So the focus here is on protecting natural ecosystems.
Right.
Reducing pollution, promoting sustainable practices.
So less about the human impact and more about preserving nature.
Yeah, though often there's an implied connection between a healthy environment and human well-being.
Right, of course.
Right.
Okay, what about the third sub-discourse?
This one he calls the worry discourse.
Worry.
And it's interesting because this one actually cuts across both sides of the climate change debate.
Okay.
So those who accept the science worry about the dire consequences of inaction.
Right.
While those who are skeptical worry about the economic costs
Right.
and potential restrictions on individual liberties.
So worry becomes this common thread.
Exactly.
Even if the source of that worry is different.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this highlights the importance of understanding the emotional dimensions of these debates.
Right.
It's not just about facts and figures.
It's about how people feel.
Exactly.
Right.
Hopes, fears, anxieties about the future.
Yeah, if we want to have constructive conversations, we need to acknowledge those feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the fourth and final sub-discourse is the financial discourse,
Okay.
which is kind of intertwined with all the others.
Right.
This one focuses on the economic implications of both action and inaction.
So it's about weighing the costs and benefits.
Exactly.
Well,
trying to figure out the most economically sound approach.
Right. And I imagine this one gets pretty heated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it taps into fundamental questions about values and priorities.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront what we're willing to sacrifice both individually and collectively.
To address this challenge. Okay, so we've got these 4 distinct sub-discourses: denial, nature, conservation, worry, and finance. It's amazing how even within a single topic like climate change, there's so much nuance and complexity.
Absolutely. It really highlights the importance of listening carefully.
Yes.
Not just to the words being spoken, but to the underlying assumptions and motivations.
The why behind the what.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny because we often talk about the need for more civil discourse on these contentious issues.
Right.
But sometimes I think the most civil thing we can do is actually get a little uncivil.
Oh, interesting. How do you mean?
You know, in the sense of challenging those polite but ultimately superficial conversations.
Yeah.
And really digging into the messy and uncomfortable truths.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It speaks to the importance of critical thinking and intellectual honesty.
Right.
You know, we need to be willing to question our own assumptions and biases.
Absolutely.
As well as those of others.
If we want to move beyond just talking past each other.
Exactly. If we actually want to find solutions.
This deep dive is really opening my eyes to how much more there is to these conversations.
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
That meets the eye.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into the language of climate change, we'll uncover even more layers of meaning.
I'm ready for it.
And persuasive techniques that are shaping the way we think about this crucial issue.
Okay, so we've uncovered these sneaky rhetorical tactics. We've explored all these different sub-discourses, battling it out in the climate change arena. What else is lurking beneath the surface of these conversations?
Well, one thing that always fascinates me is how these authors use narratives and storytelling to make their arguments stick.
Yeah.
They weave these compelling tales that tap into our emotions and values, and they really draw us into their worldview.
Oh, I am a sucker for a good story.
Aren't we all?
But how are they using narratives in this debate that's supposed to be all about, science and data?
Well, remember that opinion piece where like, stopping climate change is hopeless? Let's do it?
Yeah.
They use this really powerful analogy comparing the fight against climate change to like some of humanity's greatest challenges, like the Black Death, World War II.
Oh, wow.
So they're tapping into our collective memory,
right?
Reminding us that humans have faced seemingly insurmountable odds before and come out on the other side.
We've been through hell and back.
Exactly. It's a story of resilience,
right?
Ingenuity,
right? The
power of collective action.
Yeah.
They're saying, hey, we've been through this before.
Yeah.
Climate change may seem hopeless.
Right.
But if we band together, we can overcome this too.
It's like they're casting us as the underdogs, the unlikely heroes in this global fight for survival.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a narrative that resonates so deeply with that human desire for a happy ending,
We all want that happy ending.
Yeah, we want to believe that we can fix this and create a better future.
Okay, so that's the consensus view. What about the skeptics? What kind of stories are they telling?
Well, their narratives often center around this idea of themselves as like brave truth tellers. The ones who are willing to question the prevailing dogma, even when it means, facing ridicule or ostracism.
It's like the classic Galileo narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're positioning themselves as the outsiders.
Right.
The ones who see through the illusions that everyone else is blindly accepting.
So it's not just about the facts. It's about who is telling the story and how they're framing themselves within that story.
It's like a battle for control of the narrative itself.
Wow, this is making me realize how much of our understanding of the world is shaped by these narratives.
It really is.
These stories we tell ourselves and each other.
And that's why it's so crucial to be aware of them, to dissect them, and understand how they work. It's not about dismissing all narratives, but about recognizing that they're constructions and often serve very specific purposes.
Okay, so we've got these dueling narratives, each trying to capture our hearts and minds.
Yeah.
What other linguistic tricks should we be watching out for?
Well, one thing that often jumps out at me is the strategic use of metaphors.
Oh, metaphors.
They're incredibly powerful tools for shaping our understanding of complex concepts.
Oh, I love metaphors.
Yeah, they can really bring an idea to life.
They can.
What kind of metaphors are we seeing in these climate change articles?
Yeah, what's popping up?
Well, one that caught my eye was the depiction of climate change as a minefield.
A minefield?
Michael Mann uses this in that National Geographic article.
Oh, okay.
The idea is that with every step we take, the risks escalate.
Ooh.
And the potential for irreversible damage increases.
That's a chilling image.
It is. It creates this sense of danger,
Yeah.
of lurking threats just beneath the surface.
Okay, so it's not just like this gradual warming trend. It's like the possibility of sudden and irreversible shifts.
Exactly. And that sense of impending danger is further amplified by another common metaphor, climate change as a time bomb.
Oh, yeah.
It's ticking away.
Like it's not just a problem for future generations.
Right.
It's a clear and present danger.
It's exactly. These metaphors create a sense of urgency, emphasizing that we're on a limited time frame to act
Before it's too late.
before the consequences become truly devastating.
And it seems like these metaphors are primarily being used by, those who support the consensus view.
Yes, generally speaking.
The ones who are sounding the alarm.
Yeah, they're using this very vivid and often alarming imagery to try to galvanize action.
Right.
To break through the complacency and motivate people to demand change. But we also see metaphors being employed by those who are more skeptical of climate change.
Okay, but their aims are probably a little different.
Their aims are quite different, in fact.
So how are they using metaphors?
Well, their metaphors often serve to kind of downplay the role of human activity.
Okay.
Or to make it seem like a natural and inevitable process.
Okay.
For example, they might compare climate change to the changing seasons.
Okay.
Or the ebb and flow of the tides.
So instead of a minefield or a time bomb,
Right.
They're painting a picture of this gentle cyclical process.
Exactly something that's always happened and is outside of our control.
Like there's no need to panic.
Okay.
It's just nature doing its thing.
Precisely.
Great.
And while these metaphors might be comforting on the surface,
Yeah.
they can be quite misleading and even dangerous.
Right?
Because they obscure the reality of human impact and the urgent need to address it.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple figures of speech
I know.
can have such a huge impact on the way we think and feel.
It all comes back to the power of language.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just about conveying information.
It's about shaping perceptions.
Exactly. Evoking emotions
Right.
and ultimately influencing action or inaction.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I feel like I have this whole new set of lenses to view this debate.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives.
Yeah.
It's about going beyond the surface, peeling back the layers, and gaining a deeper understanding of the forces that are shaping our world.
So as we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? What's the most important thing to remember about the language of climate change?
I'd say the key takeaway is this: be vigilant. Pay attention to the language being used, not just the words themselves,
Right.
but the underlying assumptions, the framing techniques, the emotional appeals, the narratives, the metaphors. Language is a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And in the realm of climate change, it's being used to persuade, to manipulate, to shape our understanding of one of the most crucial issues facing humanity.
Such a powerful message. And I think it applies to so much more than just climate change, We all need to be critical thinkers, questioning not just the information we receive, but also the way it's being presented to us.
Absolutely, because ultimately it's our choices based on our understanding of the world that will determine the future we create.
This has been an incredible journey. Thanks for diving deep with us into this fascinating and often treacherous world of the language of climate change. We hope you learned a few things along the way, and most importantly, that you'll continue to stay curious, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter most.